In the summer of 1780, a quiet, unassuming merchant in British-occupied Manhattan sits at his coffee house counter, listening to a group of redcoat officers complain about their commanders over rum and memorizing every careless detail they let slip. Later that night, alone, he will dip a quill into a bottle of liquid that looks exactly like water and write a report between the lines of an ordinary business letter, a report that will vanish completely the moment it dries. For 5 years, this man will hand British officers their coffee, nod politely at their gossip, and quietly funnel some of the most important intelligence of the entire war straight to George Washington, all without a single person in New York ever suspecting who he really was. His name would not be publicly confirmed for another century. To understand why this network existed at all, you have to go back to 1776 and a young Continental officer named Nathan Hale. Early in the war, Washington had desperately needed intelligence on British positions around New York, and Hale, a Yale-educated schoolteacher with no training in espionage whatsoever, volunteered for the job. Within 2 weeks of crossing into British-held territory, Hale was captured and hanged as a spy, reportedly meeting his death with considerable composure, but without ever delivering a single useful piece of intelligence back to Washington. His body was left on public display for days afterward as a deliberate warning to anyone else who might consider the same path. It was a painful, costly lesson, and Washington drew a clear conclusion from it. Enthusiasm alone was not enough. If American intelligence gathering was going to matter, it needed discipline, structure, and people who actually knew how to disappear into their surroundings rather than get caught within days of starting. In 1778, Washington turned to a young major named Benjamin Tallmadge, another Yale graduate who had actually been a classmate of Hale's, and tasked him with building something far more careful and sustainable than a single untrained volunteer walking into enemy territory. Tallmadge began by reaching out to people he already trusted completely, old friends from his own childhood on Long Island, rather than recruiting strangers into a network where a single bad choice could get everyone killed. Tallmadge's first and most important recruit was Abraham Woodhull, a farmer from the Long Island town of Setauket who took the code name Samuel Culper, and who became the network's first point of contact, gathering information from occasional trips into the city. But Woodhull's farming responsibilities and personal risk tolerance made him a poor fit to operate deep inside British-held Manhattan on a permanent basis, and by 1779, the ring needed someone actually living and working inside the city itself, someone who could plausibly justify being there day after day without ever raising suspicion. Woodhull recommended a fellow Long Islander he knew personally, a Quaker merchant named Robert Townsend, who had grown up in Oyster Bay and was already running a shipping and mercantile business in Manhattan alongside his brother and cousin. Townsend agreed to join, taking the code name Samuel Culper Jr., and in the network's numerical system designed to keep even internal correspondence secure, he became known simply as the number 723. Townsend's position was, in almost every practical sense, perfect cover. As a merchant, he had a legitimate reason to move through the docks, warehouses, and shops of occupied Manhattan constantly, and he supplemented his income by writing society and business items for a local newspaper, giving him yet another completely natural excuse to ask questions and gather details from people who had no reason to think twice about a friendly, curious tradesman. Townsend's own contribution went beyond gossip overheard at a bar. As a working journalist contributing items to a local paper, he had a natural pretext to ask direct questions of people who would have grown suspicious of an ordinary merchant probing the same way, and he used that access deliberately, treating his own social calendar as a kind of ongoing intelligence-gathering operation rather than a matter of chance. He also took a financial stake in a coffee house in partnership with James Rivington, a prominent Loyalist publisher whose newspaper openly supported the Crown, giving Townsend a further entirely natural reason to be exactly where British officers gathered to relax, drink, and talk more freely than they should have. Rivington's own later, separately confirmed cooperation with the same spy network only added another layer of irony to the arrangement, though the two men's true loyalties remained hidden from almost everyone around them for years. What made the Culper ring different from earlier, more amateurish American intelligence efforts was the sheer level of operational security built into how information actually moved. Townsend would gather details, troop movements, ship arrivals, officer conversations, supply shipments, and pass them along a carefully designed chain rather than risk direct contact with Washington's army himself. A courier named Austin Rowe, a Setauket tavern keeper, would ride a roughly 55-mile round trip into Manhattan, visit Townsend's shop under the guise of ordinary business, and carry messages back out to Long Island, where Abraham Woodhull would take over. From there, a whaleboat captain named Caleb Brewster would row the intelligence across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where Tallmadge would finally receive it and pass it on to Washington. Every link in that chain only ever dealt directly with the people immediately next to them, meaning that even if one courier were captured, they generally could not expose the identities of anyone else further up or down the line. To protect the contents of the messages themselves, Tallmadge developed a numerical code book assigning specific numbers to hundreds of common words, names, and places, so that a message referencing General Washington, the number 711, or England, the number 745, would mean nothing to anyone without Tallmadge's key. For anything that could not be safely written even in code, Townsend used a specially developed invisible ink, a chemical solution nicknamed the stain, created by a doctor named James J., brother of the future Supreme Court Chief Justice John J. Once dry, writing done in the stain was completely undetectable to the naked eye and could only be revealed again using a second chemical solution, the counterpart, that Tallmadge and Washington kept carefully guarded and rationed out sparingly. Townsend would often write his real report in invisible ink between the lines of an entirely mundane, unremarkable letter about ordinary shop business, then send the sheet along hidden inside a stack of blank paper he was legitimately shipping as merchandise, a method so effective that British inspectors checking merchant correspondence had no reason to suspect anything at all, since the paper itself looked like nothing more than routine commercial stock. The system was not foolproof, and everyone involved understood the stakes of a single mistake. Tallmadge himself later admitted the constant fear of discovery weighed on every member of the ring, since capture would almost certainly have meant the same fate that had befallen Nathan Hale years earlier, a fact none of them needed reminding of. If you are learning something from this breakdown, take a second and hit subscribe. We cover overlooked figures and hidden histories like this every week, and what this network uncovers next genuinely changed the course of the war. The value of this elaborate system became unmistakable in the summer of 1780. Townsend's observations from inside occupied New York, combined with reports funneled through the rest of the ring, revealed that British General Henry Clinton was preparing to launch a naval and land assault against a French fleet and troops that had just landed at Newport, Rhode Island, the first major French military commitment to directly support the American cause on land. If Clinton's attack succeeded, it risked crippling the young Franco-American alliance before it ever had a chance to matter, a partnership that had taken years of diplomacy to secure and that the American war effort desperately needed to hold together. Warned in time by the Culper network, Washington responded not just with a direct alert to the French commander, the Comte de Rochambeau, but with a calculated deception of his own. He allowed forged documents suggesting an imminent American assault on New York City itself to fall into British hands, deliberately manufacturing exactly the kind of threat that would force Clinton to cancel the Newport expedition and pull his forces back to defend Manhattan instead. The plan worked. Clinton called off the attack, the French landed and dug in without interference, and an alliance that would prove decisive at Yorktown a year later survived its first real test, in large part because a merchant in a coffee house had been listening carefully enough to notice what was being planned before it ever left the drawing board. Just weeks later, in the late summer and early fall of 1780, Townsend's reports played a role in one of the most consequential intelligence stories of the entire war. Townsend's observations from within Loyalist social circles flagged something unusual about the sudden appointment of General Benedict Arnold, one of the most celebrated American commanders of the war so far, to take command of the critical fortress at West Point. Reports gathered through Townsend's network noted suspicious meetings and contacts consistent with a much larger betrayal quietly taking shape behind the scenes. It is worth being honest about exactly how much credit belongs to the Culper ring in what followed. Arnold's plot to hand West Point over to the British was ultimately exposed in large part because his British contact, Major John Andre, was captured directly by American militia while carrying incriminating documents hidden in his boot, a stroke of old-fashioned bad luck for the British, rather than a triumph of espionage tradecraft on its own. Historians still debate exactly how decisive Townsend's specific reports were compared to that far more direct discovery. What is not in dispute is that the broader pattern of suspicion the Culper ring had already been tracking around Arnold's behavior helped corroborate what Andre's capture then confirmed beyond doubt, and the network's warnings meant Washington's circle was primed to recognize the danger the moment concrete evidence appeared, rather than needing to piece the entire betrayal together from scratch in the middle of a crisis. Arnold, tipped off just in time, escaped to a British warship in the Hudson before he could be arrested. Andre was tried and executed as a spy days later. Across 5 full years of operation, from 1778 until the war's end in 1783, the Culper ring accomplished something remarkable purely through discipline. Not a single one of its core members was ever unmasked by the British during the war itself. Only one piece of Culper correspondence was ever intercepted, a letter taken from Tallmadge that contained information about a potential new recruit rather than anything that could expose an existing agent, and even then the person in question was warned in time to destroy any incriminating evidence before it could be used against them. Robert Townsend's own role remained so completely hidden that even George Washington himself, according to most historical accounts, never learned Culper Jr.'s true identity during the war or in the years that followed. Townsend went back to ordinary civilian life afterward, eventually returning to live at his family's home, Raynham Hall, in Oyster Bay, and by every account he wanted nothing to do with public recognition for what he had done. He kept his secret from friends, from family, and reportedly even declined any personal acknowledgement Washington might have offered him after the war. The truth did not come out for a very long time. Beginning in the late 1920s, a Long Island historian named Morton Pennypacker began comparing Townsend's known handwriting against the surviving Culper Jr. letters, and by the end of the following decade, in 1939, detailed document analysis had confirmed conclusively that the quiet Oyster Bay merchant and the anonymous spy at the heart of Washington's intelligence network in occupied Manhattan had been the same person the entire time. Townsend had died in 1838. It took roughly a century after his death for the world to learn what he had actually done during the war, and by the time it did, everyone who had known him personally was long gone as well. Washington understood something that most of his contemporaries did not fully appreciate about how the war would actually be won. Facing an enemy with more soldiers, more ships, and dramatically more resources, Washington concluded that his best chance of survival was not simply better tactics on the battlefield, but better information than the British had about him, gathered quietly and consistently over years rather than in a single dramatic gesture. The Culper ring never fired a shot or won a battle in any conventional sense. What it did was consistently strip away the element of surprise that a wealthier, better-equipped opponent depended on to press its advantages, warning Washington in time to protect the French alliance at Newport, and helping expose one of the most dangerous acts of betrayal the American cause faced during the entire war. It was, in its own quiet way, exactly the same underdog logic that shaped so much of how the war in the South would later be fought. An outmatched side finding an advantage its stronger opponent could not easily counter, and simply refusing to fight on the terms the enemy expected or even fully understood was happening at all. Raynham Hall, the Townsend family home in Oyster Bay, still stands today as a museum, preserving the rooms where Robert Townsend lived out the rest of his quiet, deliberately unremarkable life after the war, never once telling the people closest to him what he had actually risked. Visitors can walk through the same halls where a man who helped protect a fragile alliance and helped expose a general's betrayal chose, again and again, to say absolutely nothing about it. Standing there today, it is worth remembering that Townsend never wanted a statue, a street named after him, or a place in the history books at all. He wanted the war to end, the country to survive, and to go back to being an ordinary Long Island merchant nobody looked at twice. For roughly 150 years combined, between the end of the war and the eventual historical confirmation of who he really was, he got exactly that. If this kind of overlooked figure is your thing, Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and leave a comment telling us which forgotten spy or commander you want us to cover next.